Hello and welcome. I'm Adam Yasser. This Sunday, Poles will elect their new president in what has become a close race between the pro-European government candidate, Rafał Trzaskowski, and Eurosceptic Karol Nawrocki of the opposition Law and Justice. The vote is watched in Kiev and other European capitals with apprehension after Mr. Nawrocki has embraced a nationalist, anti-EU and anti-Ukraine platform. And while the president does not formulate foreign policy, the post is powerful enough to hamper the government's domestic and European policy agenda. I will discuss this with Leszek Jażdżewski, editor-in-chief of Liberty magazine, but first a quick update on the campaign.
The Polish presidential election on Sunday is shaping up as a referendum on Poland's direction under the current mainstream coalition led by Prime Minister Donald Tusk, the former head of the European Council. Mr. Tusk's candidate is Rafał Trzaskowski, the 53-year-old mayor of Warsaw, who promises liberalized abortion laws and strong support for Ukraine. As a multilingual, experienced politician and son of a jazzman, Trzaskowski embodies the mainstream Western-orientated Poland. His opponent, 42-year-old historian Karol Nawrocki of the Conservative Law and Justice Party, is a political novice campaigning on national sovereignty, traditional values, and a deep suspicion of the EU. He opposes abortion reform, warns against foreign, read German, influence, and is an admirer of Donald Trump. On Tuesday, Trump's close ally, Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem, urged Poles to vote for Nawrocki during her speech at a conservative conference in southeastern Poland.
I just had the opportunity to meet with Karol, and listen, he needs to be the next president of Poland. Do you understand me?
Opinion polls suggest the race is a dead heat, reflecting a sharp split between urban, affluent and pro-European Poles living in the big cities and socially conservative, isolationist and rural dwellers for whom identity politics, religion and skepticism about Poland's place in Europe resonates strongly. Nawrocki's campaign has been weighed down by controversy. He's been accused of acquiring an apartment from an elderly man under questionable terms and allegedly facilitating escort services during his earlier work in hotel security, claims he denies. The decisive factor may ultimately lie with voters of the third man, Sławomir Mencen. The far-right libertarian garnered nearly 15% in the first round. Nawrocki seemed to take his support for granted, and yet Mr. Mencen seems reluctant to endorse either man. In a coup for Trzaskowski, Mencen held a civilized discussion with him on his YouTube channel and stunned the public by crowning it with a joint beer in the pub. The election's outcome will now depend on mobilization of swing voters, many of whom stayed away in the first round. In a sign that turnout may exceed previous presidential elections, a record number of expatriate Poles, around 700,000, registered to vote abroad. Trzaskowski needs younger, libertarian, as well as left-leaning voters to show up. Nawrocki is counting on the disciplined law and justice electorate and the sizable Eurosceptic and ultra-nationalist sentiment in rural areas.
So, Leszek, welcome to the program again. Good to have you.
Thank you for the invitation.
So, the Trump administration in the end came out in favor of Mr. Nawrocki, although for a moment I had some doubts whether Kristi Noem could pronounce his last name, so she referred to him as Karol only. Is that significant, that endorsement?
Even though Poland is very pro-American, I doubt that anyone from Trump administration, including Donald Trump, can dictate to Poles who should be the next president. But Poland also, I think Trump refrained from directly attacking the opposite candidate, Mr. Trzaskowski. So we didn't see the effect as in Canada, for example, of getting behind Trzaskowski to oppose Donald Trump. I think Poles are also too pro-American for that.
So does that explain why the Trzaskowski campaign basically ignored this statement yesterday?
I think for Trzaskowski, even though he personally, he doesn't have any beef between himself and Trump administration, he had a very good relationship with the previous ambassador under Trump. I think it is quite clear that current government is not on the best terms with the Trump administration in general. So for Trzaskowski, it's better to say quite ambiguously how he's going to keep good ties with American administrations. Any Polish government should, and any Polish president should. But at the same time, he shouldn't get into details. At the same, I mean, why Nawrocki had that picture with Trump? Obviously, Trzaskowski could not secure something like this for him. So I think it's better to ignore it than to get into details or criticize it.
Right. So the consensus seems to be that if Mr. Trzaskowski wins this presidency, we can expect continuity in terms of what the current government does, because he's close associate of Prime Minister Tusk. But the bigger unknown is Mr. Nawrocki. So what can we expect, let's say, on the top issue in Europe these days, which is war in Ukraine, if Mr. Nawrocki becomes president?
So Nawrocki came out as someone who is opposing the Ukraine joining NATO. But, you know, we have to be realistic about it. It's not the prospect that we should expect to come to fruition anytime soon.
But, pardon me for interrupting you, but it's a departure from what his party, Law and Justice, and the current president, which is also from that party, Andrzej Duda, have been saying publicly for years. That, and they were even sort of criticizing other European countries that were lukewarm on Ukraine's NATO membership. So, in a sense, it's a departure from the traditional Law and Justice narrative about Ukraine.
Indeed, you are absolutely right. I think with deciding that it's Mr. Nawrocki who is supposed to be the candidate, Kaczynski made
the Law and Justice leader.
He made a U-turn in the Ukrainian policy, because he chose Nawrocki for the very reason that Nawrocki is not standing behind the decision of the government to open up to Ukrainians, refugees, to help Ukraine to such extent. It is a part of the right-wing coalition, which is Ukraine-skeptic. And I think until the election of Prime Minister Donald Tusk, Law and Justice on Ukrainian issues were very clearly pro-Ukrainian. Nawrocki is, maybe I wouldn't call him anti-Ukrainian every issue, but he's definitely, maybe because of the fact that he is currently the head of the EPN, the institution which is taking care of the memory and history in Poland, he is mostly underlining the historical ambivalence towards Ukrainians. And he wants to gain some political points, score political points, because many people with the right-wing views are also feeling that Ukrainians are, well, they are having too many favors in Poland. So I don't think it's tactical on his part. I think he's strategically ambivalent about Ukraine, but I think that on this issue, what we can observe, he's going to, I think, limit governments on European initiatives. As long as US stays pro-Ukrainian, Nawrocki will have to be the same. But along France, along Germany, I think it's going to be much more difficult for the governments to have a European Ukrainian policy.
But we saw in recent months that Poland is increasingly sitting at the top table when it comes to Ukrainian matters. Prime Minister Tusk was present in some of the conversations with Donald Trump about how to deal with Russia. Poland played host to some meetings, took part in some of this diplomacy. Is this going to continue, given that the government ultimately controls foreign policy if Mr. Nawrocki wins?
Right, so I would refer to what you expressed at the beginning of our conversation, the policy of continuity. You know, we have to bear in mind that currently we have cohabitation, so we have a president from the other party. If Nawrocki wins, nothing is going to change.
So it's going to be another cohabitation.
Another cohabitation. What's important here is that I think Tusk's position in Europe is not just the Polish position, you know, it's also his political capital as someone who managed as a first country leader in a country of this size to have this decisive win against populists and nationalists. And if he's going to lose a lot of his political capital in the same way as Mr. Macron lost, changing prime ministers all the time without having this majority now in the French parliament. So it is very much the sort of political position of the Prime Minister, not really the competence of the President, which are going to influence the Polish position in Europe.
So, if I understood you correctly, you're saying if Mr. Nawrocki wins, Tusk's position domestically and internationally is going to suffer.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right.
Right. And what could be the consequences of that?
Well, you know, with having a full-party coalition government, and it's difficult to manage as it is. If many people will be hedging against the losing the seat in the parliament or losing power in 2 years, it's going to be first 2 years without elections in Poland, but still this parliamentary election 2027 are looming close for some of the parties, which might not be sure if they're going to enter parliament. If we, you know, just a short diversion. If you look at the results of the first round of presidential elections, it is going to be constitutional majority for the far right. So I think many people might get scared, and it's a question whether the government would survive another 2 years, having to fight against the very hostile president.
So, in a sense, it must be a déjà vu for Mr. Tusk, because in 2015, his party, the Civic Platform, lost the presidential election. Their candidate lost. And Mr. Duda, who was elected for his first term then, immediately demanded that the government stopped working, and he effectively called for parliamentary elections. They were coming anyway, these parliamentary elections. Can we expect Mr. Nawrocki also to say, well, you know, this means I have a strong popular mandate, this government has lost popular mandate, so we need early elections?
Absolutely, I think you're right. That might be a possibility. What's difficult for the president? He needs a reason to call early elections. So whether the budget is not going to pass, or well, there must be a constructive majority against current government. I don't think it's very likely soon, but it's not impossible in a midterm when government is going to lose certain votes in the parliament. What's the difference between 2015 and now? 2015 was the end of the era of 8 years of Donald Tusk rule. We tend to forget it's only 2 years exactly right now, since even less actually, since then actually came to power. So it's going to be even less than 2 years when the new president will be taking office. So the question is whether Tusk, I think Tusk will survive. He's a survivor. And in 2015, he wasn't even in Poland. He was already in Brussels as a head of the council. So I think he will manage his party. I think he will manage to get back to polarization, explain why he cannot implement anything in the parliament. But I fear for his counterparts in the government from the smaller coalition parties. I don't think they are going to survive the losing of presidential elections by Trzaskowski.
Right. So let's go back to the campaign itself. Mr. Nawrocki has faced various questions about his past, about his integrity, but it seems it barely dented his support. How do you explain that?
Well, I think for many people it will resemble of what we've seen in Washington with Donald Trump, and a certain overheating or perhaps too many of the scandals that emerged very last minute, even this week, against Mr. Nawrocki. I think for many voters, especially those committed right-wing law and justice voters, they simply don't believe it. With such a polarized media scene, especially when the other political side is taking this accusation seriously, is going to repeat them, people just reject. People don't want to listen. But we have to bear in mind that while the 35–40% of the electorate might be resistant to this message, the question is how those 10, 15, 20% of those who will decide those elections, those who voted in the first round, but they don't have their own candidate in the second round. It's almost 40% of the electorate. It's for the first time in the history of Polish presidential elections. They don't have their candidate in the second round. How they are going to react to that? I think some of them would ultimately might decide, okay, I don't want to be associated with the kind of guy like Nawrocki.
All right, so latest opinion polls seem to indicate that Mr. Trzaskowski has marginal advantage over Mr. Nawrocki. But we saw in the first round that opinion polls were basically wrong because they were predicting a solid lead by Mr. Trzaskowski, and it ended up virtually even. So is the right-wing electorate underestimated again?
You know, I think, you know, polls, you have to know how to read them. And
okay,
the polls,
tell us.
the polls never resemble reality of the election day, even just because they are taken way before. There is always, 6% of people who are undecided at the moment of the polls. They're going to decide later on. Some people refrain from answering the question. So it's always a sort of estimate. And then when we read elections, let's say, we see that there is like 49, 48 lead for Trzaskowski. Well, first of all, he needs 51. So even from this poll, you understand that there are 3 or 4% of people who are not counted by this poll. Secondly, we have 2% or 3% error. So we should rather say, speaking as a media, that it's like 44 to 48% of chance of Trzaskowski, and then it's like 47, right, 45 for Nawrocki. And then you realize that this is exactly this. It's not a toying cause. It's just we don't know. This race is too close to call right now. We can't reasonably expect from those results to guess who's going to win. I mean, we can try to guess. My guess is that this time a lot of voters from the first round might not vote in the second round. We're gonna have an influx of voters who didn't vote in the first round because they vote. I mean, it wasn't decisive. Decisive is the second round, so they hesitated, they waited until the second round. And I do believe that Trzaskowski has an advantage because of the reserves of the voters who voted for coalition currently in government in 2023. But no, it's educated guess. I don't have data to support it.
Okay, so, is this about issues or is it about images more? Is it more about issues such as, I don't know, healthcare, abortion rights, I don't know, economy? Or is it about identity and, sense of where Poland stands emotionally?
It is, I think, quite a general question. What is the politics about? And I think, we are not Britain. It's not even about party manifestos. Especially in presidential elections, it's a combination of personality.
It's a beauty contest.
Well, I wouldn't get. It's not. Well, if it's a beauty contest, I do believe that Trzaskowski might win decisively.
Okay,
at least
you favor him.
It is what women. This is what women say.
Oh, you're careful now to quote women on this, right?
But I don't know. Nawrocki is strong.
But jokes aside,
yes. So I think it's a sort of combination of personality, identification with the political stance. It's a question: who stands for me? Who takes care for people like me? This is really, it's not really who is going to help me personally, because people know they're not going to get anything out of who becomes a president. It's a question who stays closer to me, who I can identify with.
So more cultural identity issues.
It's a sort of broad question, also including how the candidates speak. Who is he against? I think, especially recently, it's very much it's not what he stands for, it is who is he against, who is attacking him. And I think this is the reason, just hinting to the previous question, why those attacks of Warsaw elites, of the media, who are perceived as dishonest by the large part of the right-wing electorate, is not really hurting Mr. Nawrocki, because they see, oh, this is the same guys who opposed the social programs by Law and Justice in the past, and they're attacking him, so he is our guy, therefore they favor him. So, in the end, it's going to be decided by this strong identification with the candidates.
Right. So, because you mentioned this previous period when Tusk was prime minister for 8 years, and then came the big change. Law and Justice took over in 2015, and they stayed in power for 8 years. And Mr. Duda is the extension of that, the current president, the incumbent. And now, if Mr. Nawrocki wins, he will take over. So in other words, law and justice will continue to be present in Polish politics in a very meaningful way. So my question to you is the victory of the current coalition in 2023 a brief pause in the swing to the right that has taken place in Poland over the past 10 years?
I don't think it is. I think it was a genuine, the victory of 2023 was a genuine frustration with law and justice. And there were a lot of voters who were maybe, they didn't love Donald Tusk or his coalition partners, but they were simply fed up with how much the previous coalition stole, how much they destroyed the relationships abroad, what they did with the judicial system, and so on and so on. In the end, I think it's a question whether this presidential elections is still a phase, the previous phase we saw in 2023, and then other victories of the current coalition governments, or is it a new phase, like in 2015, a new phase in which law and justice and the possible coalition partners from the Confederacja, the other right-wing party, are going to emerge victorious? What I find extremely interesting is that you see this, especially young voters, choosing against both parties.
Right, either left or far-right libertarian, if you will.
Exactly. And what are they going to do? I don't think they identify with either side. We tend to assign them, and in the end they will have to choose between two alternatives.
Those who show up, because
of
a lot of them may...
Some of them might not vote. But in parliamentary elections, they might have their own representation. And it is going to be very interesting whether these elections will be the last accord of this law and justice versus civic platform fight, which we've seen since 2005. So it's 20 years of choosing between A or B.
And in fact, both with, let's say, solidarity trade union pedigree, and both effectively on center-right, or maybe, one of them a bit more to the right and the other center-right, but they basically are very similar in many ways.
Well, they were supposed to rule together in 2005. So I'm very curious. I wouldn't say we have the swing to... I mean, we might see political swing to the right. It doesn't mean that
society as a whole.
Society is becoming less religious, is becoming in many ways more tolerant. And we see the swing to the right of the political spectrum. I do think that in many ways it's a reaction against the elites, against the status quo, and I think it's expressed in many ways by this anti-establishment vote. It doesn't mean that all the Manson voters, so the third-party candidate from the right, are necessarily very authoritarian or very right-wing. They might be quite libertarian actually, but they have to vote for the candidate who represents also very religious Catholic values, which they don't identify with.
Right. Well, Leszek, thank you very much. That was a very good explainer on the Polish election, and the vote is just 3 days away.
Thank you. Can't wait to see the results.
Thank you very much for watching. This was On the Record, and stay with TVP World for more news on the Polish election.